Welcome, Bev, to the Happier at Work podcast. I'm absolutely delighted to have you as my guest today. One of our mutual friends and a past podcast guest introduced us to each other. And I know last month, or could be a little bit longer than that now at this stage, we recorded a podcast together on your podcast. I'd love for you to introduce yourself to the listeners today. Let them know a little bit about your background and how you got to where you are today.
Hi, Aoife. Thanks so much. It's fun to be on the other side of the microphone. And we had a delightful conversation on the People at Work podcast, which is the podcast I host. And I love being able to reciprocate and come back and continue our conversation perhaps with just a slightly different focus. So thanks so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to being here. So quick intro about me, Bev Attfield. I work at a company called Jostle, which is a tech company based in Vancouver, Canada. And my role there is Principal of Workplace Science, which is kind of a lot of words just to say that I'm really just interested in the human experience at work. And by understanding the science of how people come together and do work, we can actually start to realize what things are impacting the workday experience, what are the emotional drivers of people and how they feel during their workday. And then, what do leaders do once they know that those things are at play, right? So I spend my time at Jostle a bit on the outside of the business where I'm out in the community of thinkers and leaders and academics and theorists and people who are actually practicing this in their organizations to find out what the trends are at work today. I mean, especially since we know so much has changed for work in the last 18 to 20 months. And then on the inside of Jostle, I look after our own employee experience and our own leadership development and growth, and really just thinking about how we unite our organization, given all the changes that's happened with us moving to remote overnight. And we've now chosen to be a hybrid workplace. So that's presenting a new opportunity for us to imagine what our workflow and work process and work experience will be for our people. So
Brilliant.
That was actually a much longer intro, I think, than you might have been expecting, but there you go.
Not at all. Not at all. That's perfect. And there's so much I'd love to unpack in that conversation. And this idea of like the people science thing, I was like, oh, that sounds like the perfect type of, I would love that title. Love that. Love it. So first thing I want to ask you about, you spoke about emotional drivers. I'd love to know a little bit more about what are you seeing out there as being the emotional drivers at work, and how, we'll probably come on to talk a little bit about how things have changed, but I'd love to know, has there been any change specifically with those emotional drivers in the last, nearly 2 years at this stage?
Yeah, I do think so. And I think maybe people have been feeling these things for some time, but the pandemic and the way that work changed really just gave us a big shove in the right direction to surface a lot of these issues. Everything from inclusion and belonging to psychological safety to fairness and equity in the workplace. I think all of those things have really been placed firmly on our radar as leaders, and in organizations, we know we've had to look at those things more carefully now because everything was exposed, right? I mean, even though people went home to their homes or their, office, wherever that might be, that isn't in their company's workplace, suddenly we were in those people's living rooms and bedrooms and kitchens, which allowed us to actually see the day-to-day things that people are dealing with their families, their commitments, obligations, loneliness, isolation, frustration with the pandemic conditions. So I think for the first time, leaders actually had an opportunity to really get to know their people in quite a different way. And I think that has been stressful for leaders because suddenly I think some leaders were caught on their back foot with not actually having the tools and the equipment, the emotional equipment, to actually be able to deal with the difficulties that not only they were experiencing emotionally, but what their people were experiencing. So I think those organizations who were already cultivating a place of psychological safety, where autonomy was front and center, where there was trust already, I think those organizations likely did a lot better in the overnight shift than some other organizations that weren't ready for that. And I think we've seen that unfold over time. We've all, those of us who are in the people culture, care about workspace, you can't look very far, you don't have to look very far today in the news or in HR literature to see the Great Resignation or the turnover tsunami mentioned.
Yeah.
And, I think Adam Grant actually said it much better than the Great Resignation. He's calling it the Great Reprioritization. And I think that really is what people are starting to realize, is that the way that they used to work and the way that they were treated is not the way that they want to live their lives.
Yeah.
Because work is part of life. It's not two separate things, which is, again, another thing we've discovered. There's now this mesh and mash of things that are, some are work, some are life, some are in between. And people are reprioritizing what they want from their work. How do they want work to make them feel? How do they want to be treated by people around them? Where is their source of joy and growth in their work? And I think that we're seeing it in a tremendous number of people are reflecting on the type of work that they want to be doing, but a lot of people are reflecting on how they want to feel and be treated in the workplace. And I think that is the significant piece, because we've always had turnover. People move around, people go to different jobs. Like, that isn't new. What is new is the reasons for people to be changing jobs. And I think it does tie into your area of focus around happiness, right? It's what is the source of joy and happiness ultimately in my life? And if something is not bringing me that happiness and joy, I'm going to go somewhere else to find it.
Yeah. And I think for the most part, people have associated work with something as that has to be a struggle. Even if work sucks, they stick it out because of the paycheck, or for they've built up relationships or whatever it might be. But exactly that, and I do love that. I haven't heard that up to now, this idea of the great reprioritization. I love that phrase. I mean, I'm a huge fan of Adam Grant anyway. But I love this idea that people are kind of thinking now about, like, what do I actually want from my life, and what role does work play in that? And exactly that, how do I bring more joy into what it is that I do on a day-to-day basis? Because, I mean, work takes up so much of our time that, if you're not happy in work, and this is my whole thing, if you're not happy at work, then, it spills into other aspects of your life. It's going to spill into your relationships. It's going to spill into your home life. It's going to spill into, your attitude towards a lot of things if you're miserable at work, especially.
Yeah, definitely. And, in particular, there is a subset of our demographic. I don't know if this is true for your part of the world, but I was listening to a news report in Canada about the alarming number of women who are not returning to their original place of work where they were working prior to the pandemic.
Okay, yeah.
And we've heard stats around how women have been one of the hardest hit demographics during the pandemic, because they've had the childcare stresses and the home care stresses and those types of things, and that's to be expected. What was really surprising about this research that was coming to the forefront is that women are just choosing to not go back and not having anything else to go to. They are taking a moment to actually think about what they want for their lives, and they're tired of being burnt out, stressed, sidelined, being asked to do things that are not within their domain or their focus. And they're basically pushing back and saying, look, we're not doing this anymore. And I say bravo, like, amazing. However, we need to get that demographic of people and contributors back into the workplace. So what does that mean for leaders and organizations? Well, more change, right? More listening, more understanding of what people actually want in the workplace, and how do people want to feel during those 8, 9, 10 hours at work. So I think it's a really interesting time from so many angles for us to be understanding what's happening.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I have a few questions. I haven't seen anything specific to come from Ireland. Anecdotally, I get that that's something that's happening all over. And I have seen the report that came out, I was going to say last year, but it's probably only a few months ago now, but it just feels like a long time ago. The report from McKinsey that said about 25% of women are not expected to return. That was US based, I believe. I'm interested, Bev, to know more about the stats in Canada. And is that a particular demographic of women? Is it women at those senior roles where they might be feeling a little bit more stressed and therefore they're not coming back into that same environment? Is there anything about the types of roles or industries or anything? I mean, I'd love to understand a little bit more. And I will definitely, after this podcast, have a look and see if there's any stats in Ireland. And if there's not, then I'm going to go out and I'm going to ask the question myself.
Yeah, for sure. What I know about the information, I don't know that they've drilled down into the sort of the layers, or the sort of they haven't cut the data, perhaps, at least not in the article that I was listening to. But it is to the order of 500,000 women.
Wow.
So it's not an insignificant number of people.
Yeah.
So like, what happens to the like, what I'm concerned about is the shift that happens in a backwards direction when 500,000 women leave the workplace.
Yeah.
Because I believe in balance, inclusion, equity needs to be there in order for us to be our best as a collective group of people. And I do believe that women bring a completely different perspective, experience, attitude, interest, emotional capacity, I think, than men do. So, and again, that's obviously those are broad generalizations. My point is that if this is going to continue, we are going to really see a change in the texture of the workplace if there are women absent from the workplace.
Definitely. And you mentioned a couple of ways to that workplaces need to shift in order to maybe attract those women back in, and that's through listening and understanding. Is there any sort of practical things that you see that people could potentially do, to entice that change?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of practical and mechanical things that organizations can do. So everything from benefits to paid time off to policies around more flexible sick time or childcare time, providing supports for women who might be experiencing infertility or loss of some kind. I think bereavement leave and extending the emotional support structures that we have in organizations, I think are incredibly important for people to feel cared for and ultimately happy that their employer actually thinks about them as an individual human and not as an input into the machine to create something for profit. I think that's the shift that needs to happen, and that happens through, yes, it's the leadership attitude and it's the intention of the organization to operate in that way, but it manifests in all those small ways. So it manifests in XYZ policy and the tone and the wording that you use. Like, it gets down to that detail. And as an organization, you've got to make a decision that your tone, your character, your commitment comes out in all sorts of different ways, not just in behaviors of leaders. So it really is taking a broad look at your organization and understanding where you are being inconsistent or contradictory to something that you might be saying on your careers page as you support employees in every endeavor of their life, but when they join you, they get 2 days of paid sick time. So it's just finding those, making sure that those inconsistencies don't exist, and then really living and breathing the culture within your organization.
I'm a huge fan of that, as you'll know. Like, for me, it's about the value. It's understanding what the values are of the organization, but living those values as well, and creating that sense of inclusion. And you mentioned earlier psychological safety. I'd love to know, Bev, a little bit more about what you do on the internal piece. So we've kind of talked about a little bit more broadly about what's going on external, but I'd love to know more about what you're doing internally with the staff at Jostle.
Yeah, for sure. So Jostle is about 75 people. And as I said, we are adopting a hybrid workplace model. So before the pandemic, we were pretty much all in our office in Vancouver. We had a few people who were full-time remote, but we've always nourished and encouraged a real sense of openness and community and camaraderie within our organization. And that has predicated, I think, what we do in terms of helping our people find joy and happiness in their work. And so there's 3 areas perhaps that I'll touch on in terms of how we define happiness for the context of this conversation. So the first of those is, how successful are our jostlers? So we call our employees jostlers. So are they able to grow? Are they able to stay at the level they are at if they wish to? Are they able to have open and honest and difficult conversations if they need to? Are they given opportunities to look beyond their role and get different experiences within the workplace? Are they enabled with the tools that they need to do their jobs? So whether that be practical tools like, whatever they need to get their job done, but are they also given the resourcing and the people access to expand and grow and learn and adapt and be creative and be successful in or complete projects that they're working on in a manner that makes them feel successful? So that's really the first area for us, and that directs a lot of our learning and growth programs. So we do monthly lunch and learns, or what we call gather and grow. So we bring either external speakers, or I work on curriculum that is tied into, it's not really job growth, it's more around leadership and interpersonal development skills. So it might be things like, how do we demonstrate emotional intelligence, or how do we encourage people to learn how to be more emotionally intelligent, or what are some of the relational skills you need to do hybrid work well? So teaching how to work asynchronously, how to work out loud, how to be more visible in the things that you're doing, and who to go to for the things you need. So and then we'll teach like more typical leadership type skills like listening and feedback and difficult conversations, those sorts of things. So that's the first area that we focus on. We also do more formal leadership training. So we have in the past run multiple month leadership modules where we are really primarily focusing on how to train our manager level employees in terms of the leading and interpersonal skills specifically and within our context. So those would be more specific things around how we deliver our development cycle, or how we actually work together at Jostle. And then we have a lot of social events. Like we definitely do emphasize the social aspect of coming together. And admittedly, that's been a little harder, or a lot harder during the pandemic. It seemed like we were all fairly enthusiastic in the beginning about the Zoom dinners and the online quizzes and whatnot. That quickly started to become tired because people were tired. They were tired of being behind the video screen. They were tired of spending 9 hours a day being on calls with their workmates, and then to have to be on a social call with their workmates, not as much fun. So that's, we did start to see that we needed to reimagine how we bring people together. And so as we've been able to start coming back into our office, we are emphasizing our in-person events a lot more, with restrictions, of course, and hopefully one day we'll get back to full in-person events. But we also encourage people to get to know each other outside of their immediate working teams and groups. And we do that in a couple of ways. So we use our own platform extensively. So our product is an employee success platform. We are an evolved intranet, essentially, where we are the hub within an organization. So it's the place that people will go to connect to people, connect to news, connect to things that they need to do their workday without the noise and clutter of a traditional intranet. So we use that extensively for our own communication. That's where our culture is alive and well. And so what we've done using that tool is we have a couple things that we make available to people. So the first is we pair people up on a weekly basis in a random way to have a one-on-one coffee chat. So using our platform, we have this ability to set up tasks. So on a Monday morning, 2 jostlers will get paired together and this happens to everyone unless they've opted out, and you'll get a notification to say, oh, you've been paired with Bob, set up a meeting to chat at some point this week. And some people do it, some people don't. I personally love it. I think it's a great way to have a quick chat with someone that I don't normally talk to. And it seems like, oh, it's just another meeting, but it actually isn't. It's like a 15-minute quick check-in. Hey, how you doing? What's new for you? So that's been pretty successful, and kind of neat that we've been able to do it within our own platform. And then I love
that it's totally practicing what you preach, isn't it? It's using what you're selling to other people. Not only is it showing the benefit of your tool internally to everyone who uses it, including those people who are going out to sell it to clients, but it's showing them like this is the impact that it can have.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, we did it obviously first and foremost to give our people a way to connect with each other. But we were also curious about whether you could actually adapt part of our platform to fulfill that need, because we'd heard from our customers that many people were struggling with this sort of organic one-on-one connection that people were missing from not being in their offices. Right?
The water cooler chat.
Yeah,
it's totally gone by the wayside. Yeah, you don't have those kind of incidental meetings anymore. And that's something, it comes up on the podcast a lot, actually. And, for me, it comes back to creating the outcome of what happens in that situation rather than trying to recreate it necessarily. But if you're trying to build innovation, like setting up random meetings with people who you wouldn't normally speak to, I think is a good way to do that.
Yeah, and it really does start to provide that proxy for the social glue that we have all been missing. And I don't know that any of us was able to imagine the value of that social glue. And by social glue, I mean those moments where you might be walking to a meeting room and you suddenly find yourself in lockstep with Sally from sales, and you have a quick chat that you wouldn't have had that opportunity. And there's no way you were jumping on a video call to have a quick time-filling chat with Sally. So what the jostling chats, which is what we call them, it does is it starts to provide the kernel of an idea that you can actually get that same emotional hit from that connection with someone. As if you were in the office with that person. And yes, it is different. And I think that's the key part of hybrid that we have to embrace, is that there are going to be some things that we can adapt, but some things we need to be doing brand new, and we shouldn't have the expectation that they're going to have the same feeling as the things we're missing from the office. And again, I think those organizations that can go forward and be ready to embrace new things and adapt old things are, again, going to be far more successful than those organizations that are keep looking back, keep trying to sort of put a square peg in a round hole and make something that worked in the office work in an online environment. So the other thing that we're doing, which is kind of an adaptation as well, is so we have something called discussions in our platform, which is basically our chat tool. And we have a water cooler chat channel, which people can opt into. And so the water cooler is set up with an algorithm that pops a new question into the channel every morning. And it's anything from what's the favorite place you've traveled to, what's your favorite color, what was your most embarrassing moment. And we actually crowdsource the questions from Jostlers. So these are questions that we top up every quarter with new questions. And it's
that people have really actually asked and are curious about.
And it's just a different way to communicate and share and have a laugh. And not everyone goes in there every day, and different people will respond to different types of questions. But it's just a really lovely way to just take a few moments, have your coffee, and go and have a little bit of a laugh at what people are putting down, or learn about something or someone. So that's been pretty successful too. Now, we obviously recognize that there is value in the in-person engagement as well, 100%. And because of that, we are, in our hybrid way of thinking, we are hoping that eventually we will be bringing our people back into the office on a regular occasion, perhaps on a quarterly basis we have something called Jostle Fest, which is our every 4-month celebration of what we've achieved and what we're looking to do with our platform and with our different domain areas like sales, customer success, and marketing in the 4 months to come. So it's a tradition that we started a few years ago, and that really does galvanize us around that's our every 4 months opportunity to come together as a whole company. And we adapted it to be online for the pandemic months, which I'm really proud of us for being able to put that scale of an event together online.
Yeah.
But we do know that we actually want to be in person for that event. And that really gives us, like, at least once every 4 months, the opportunity for everybody to come into Jostle and be part of the celebration. And we make a real festival out of it. So we're going to do that in January for the first time in person. So looking forward to seeing the shift back to that, and just also like having a look at what people get from that and doing a bit of digging into is this actually something that we want to do in person going forward? Are people getting what they need from it? So so there's a lot happening for us.
I mean, I was going to say, you touched on a couple of points there. It's the two things that sprung to mind in what you've just said is it what people need? So actually understanding what your employees' needs are, but then also asking them. So there's two kind of parts to that. It's well, what do they need, and can we actually ask them what they need? And I mean, they're the two key things for me. I'd love to jump back, if we could, into what you said about the whole hybrid thing and about what makes it successful. And you mentioned about asynchronous communication and working out loud. Now, I'm always like, asynchronous communication is something that so I'm familiar with it. I've been talking about it. I've seen lots posted about it. And I recognize the name working out loud, but I'd love to know if you could share with listeners a little bit more about what you mean with both of those things and what that means in your organization and how it impacts on hybrid working.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's take asynchronous communication first. So async versus sync communication is really just, it's temporal, right? So it's about using the right kind of communication at the right time for the right purpose. And so in hybrid or remote work, because people are dispersed and they're not sitting next to one another in an office, this manner of working called asynchronous work has come about, or asynchronous communication has come about. And really what it means is that you are working on something at a different time than your coworkers might be working on it. And that's actually encouraged in remote and hybrid work settings, because absolutely. It means that people can really fully live a flexible work environment. And so it might be that an example for me is if I'm writing a blog article, I might be working on that, at 7 o'clock in the morning, put it down for a few moments, come back to it later in the afternoon, work on it in the evening, and then loop my colleague in to give it a read when I'm almost finished with it. And they would then pick it up and do it on their time. So there's no collaboration in real time unless there's something I need to talk to that person about in terms of the specific task I'm doing. I am working on it at my pace when I choose to do it, and I'm not holding anybody back with the manner in which I'm working. So that's really working asynchronously, is just that you are working at a time that is different to others, which when you're working in an office, there could be a perception that you're working synchronously, but you technically are still working asynchronously. If you're sitting at your desk, just heads down, working on something on your own, and no one else is involved in it, that's technically a form of async work. But it's more apparent in the remote and hybrid workspace, just because of the implied flexibility that you are apart from people and you're on your own doing your own thing. Where synchronous communication becomes really critical is when you start to see the urgency of communication. So if I realize that there's something failing within our platform, so let's say I come across a bug that I'm working in Jostle, and I come across a bug, I'm not going to create a Google Doc and document the bug and put it aside and email it to somebody 8 hours later.
And wait for a reply.
And wait for a reply.
Right?
that's not what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
I am going to probably jump on a call immediately, a video
Yeah.
call. I'm going to text somebody. I'm going to get in front of them using direct messaging in Jostle. I'm going to do something to escalate this in that moment. And
Yeah.
I am going to impose myself on somebody else in that moment. So
Yeah,
then
because
it becomes,
it's urgent. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
then it becomes synchronous. And
Yes.
it may not be an urgent matter either. It might just be me going, oh, I really need to solve this problem. And the best person to help me solve this problem is my CEO. And so
Yeah.
I will ping him and say, hey, can we jump on a quick call? I just really want to talk this through with you because I'm writing this blog article and I can't finish it until I've figured this out. And I really think you'll be a great sounding board. Then I'm switching from async to sync.
Okay. Yeah.
So
Brilliant.
I think it's just becoming comfortable with like finding out what works for you, and
Yeah.
it's less
Knowing
important about
which one to use at which time for
exactly.
you. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that technology is tremendously helpful. I mean, in fact, technology is what makes asynchronous communication possible.
Yeah.
The ability for people to be working around the world and plugged into the same system or the same cloud-based tool is incredible. So, you know, I think async, if you do it well, is very, very liberating. But you do need to have some guidelines. You do need to have some practical steps, and especially in roles and areas where you rely on people's contributions back into the hub. And development and technology engineering is one of those examples, right? So if you're running a tech company, you need your devs to be uploading their work into your main system, you know, on a fairly regular basis. So async doesn't also mean being in a vacuum. It means you're doing your work when you want, but you do need to have some guidelines around, well, how do you bring your work into the greater structure or network that everyone else is working on? So I think as organizations are trying to figure this out for themselves, like really having some clear guidelines about what the expectations are is a very important step here. And it rolls up into this idea that when you're thinking about working in hybrid or dispersed mode, you know, what are sort of some of the, I don't want to say rules, but what are some of the things that are non-negotiables for you as an organization?
Yeah.
And how do you help prepare people to work that way? So any questions about async or sync?
Not for me. No, I think you've explained it really, really well. Yeah, no, in terms of like setting up guidelines and having the non-negotiables. I'd love to talk a little bit more about the working out loud then that you mentioned as well. You had some really great examples that I'd love to just go back to and expand on.
Yeah, sure. So just to bridge from async into working out loud. So one of the things that I encourage at Jostle is for Jostlers to have their async working preferences in their profile. So everyone has a profile in Jostle. And so, for example, I have in my profile, my regular work hours are from 9 to 6 every day. I generally take an hour between 12 and 1 where I walk my dogs. I generally am running in the morning, so I'm not going to be available for early morning meetings. And if you need to reach me on the weekends, the best way to reach me is via cell phone. So that's my profile and my sort of declared way of being available within my organization. Other people might have something completely different, like they work from 3 p.m. to 4 a.m. That's great, but you do need to declare that.
Yeah.
And that is one of the first steps of working out loud. And working out loud in and of itself isn't just about declaring your schedule. Working out loud is about visibility. So it's visibility of you as a person and what you're working on. It's visibility for you to know how you can resource other people. So how can you be of assistance to others? And how do you make yourself available to those people? By declaring talents, skills, experience, know-how, connection, ability, etc. But it's also about you declaring what you need from other people in order to do your job. So if you're working on a project and you realize that you're stuck at a certain point, do you just kind of carry on digging away at it, trying to figure it out on your own? Or do you work out loud and say, I'm really struggling with X. Is there anyone out there that can help me move this forward? And what that requires is significant courage and vulnerability, because working out loud requires you to be comfortable with not having all the answers. It requires you to be comfortable taking risks and putting yourself in a position where you might feel like people will judge you for not knowing something. And that ties very, very directly into psychological safety. Yeah. And the types of environments that leaders are creating for their people in order to work out loud successfully. Working out loud is also about having a clear grasp of the corporate landscape that you operate in. So doing the extra work to actually understand who does what, and understanding how you might leverage or connect with people in order to move something forward. So a lot of working out loud is about just really being very open about what you're doing, why you're doing it, in a non-defensive way. And if everybody works out loud, there's no sort of hidden agenda, there's no ego, there's a great amount of humility and desire to actually collectively achieve something, without the noise and the politics that go with teamwork at times. So, so working out loud there are a few really useful resources about working out loud, and I'm happy to share those. I'll send them to you if you can include them in the show notes, maybe.
Yeah, perfect.
For listeners. It's not a very common concept, and people just immediately assume that it's telling people that you're taking a sick day. Like, no, okay, that's not what it is.
It's a bit more than that. Yeah. No, interesting. I have heard of the concept before, and I think it was from Karen actually who connected us. So yeah, very much came from her. But it's such an interesting concept, and it's so, I think it's simple, but maybe it's not something that's necessarily easy to implement. Bev, there's one thing that's kind of burning in my mind before we kind of wrap things up, and this is the idea of flexibility that you mentioned in relation, I think, to asynchronous communication specifically. And I'd love to get your thoughts, whether this is what you're seeing out and about or whether it's in your own internal organisation, on this concept of flexibility versus maybe shorter working hours, or flexibility versus burning out because we're always available, or people are working at different times and things like that. So any thoughts around that?
Yeah, look, I think there's a lot swirling around right now about how to actually define flexibility within organizations. I've seen a few larger organizations declare that they would be doing X and, requiring their people to come into the office 3 days a week. And then basically walk that back and say, no, people can be completely flexible and come in the office whenever they like. So I think organizations have a significant challenge ahead of them to really find what works for people in their organization. And I think the difficulty is that each one of us defines flexibility in a different way, likely. So, and unfortunately, I don't think you can please everybody within an organization. So I think what you have to do is do the listening, do the asking of people to understand broadly what flexibility means within your organization and your culture. And then I think, for better or for worse, organizations need to make a declaration around how flexibility is defined within their organization and what it means to live that flexibility in their culture. And so maybe for some organizations, it is, okay, well, we want everybody in the office once a week, but other than that, you're free to work however you like. Maybe for some other organizations, it's going to be, no, we want you to be completely in charge of your schedules. So come in when you want or don't. For us at Jostle, we've kept a pretty open mind in the early days here as we've moved into hybrid mode, really just to try and understand the lay of the land for people, and just because there is still so much uncertainty. So our policy is be remote if you wish to be remote, but our office is open if you wish to come into the office.
Okay.
We would love to see teams working in the office on some sort of cadence where they do get their face time, but we're not mandating it. That's up to each team. And
Yeah.
we actually celebrate microcultures at Jostle. So each team is really empowered to make decisions for themselves about what works for them and how they work together. So that is like, for us, we are extending the utmost flexibility to people at this moment, other than we are hoping that this once every 4 months Jostle Fest event is going to be our opportunity to bring everyone into the office, including people who work outside of Vancouver. And I think just we do have to keep listening to people and be ready to make adjustments one way or the other on that spectrum of flexibility. So at Jostle, in the spirit of listening, we are currently going through a process of stay interviews. So we are having a half hour to 45-minute conversation one-on-one with every single person at Jostle. And we've got 4 of our senior leaders who are conducting these interviews. And one of our questions for people is, what are you missing in hybrid mode? And what we're hoping to hear from that is, what are people actually experiencing in their day-to-day as it relates to the flexibility they've got? Are they happy with continuing to work at home? What are they missing about this new way of working? And some of the things we're hearing are, I'm missing connecting with people that I don't normally work with. I'm not missing the commute. I don't want to go back to the office full time. On the other end of it is, I would love us to mandate going in the office 3 or 4 days a week, because I think we were better in person.
Yeah.
Right. So we're hearing this like range of perceptions and impressions of what flexibility actually is. And our challenge is to distill that down into, well, what's going to be the lowest common denominator that will actually be acceptable to every person at Jostle.
Yes.
It's not going to fully meet every single person's expectations, but can it meet everyone at a baseline? And that's a really tough thing to achieve. I mean, anytime you have a group of humans together, you're not getting consensus from those people, right?
Definitely not. No.
And so I think expecting consensus is unreasonable if we think about flexibility and how hybrid is going to unfold and be an excellent way of working.
Yeah.
And I think flexibility also needs to be considered against the backdrop of usual operating practices. Like, we're still in the context of a global pandemic.
Exactly.
So flexibility for us now is a very different flavor than it might be when we don't need to wear masks and when we don't have capacity restrictions and where people aren't fearful of using transit to come into the office, right?
Yeah.
So I think there's still so much uncertainty for us all in various parts of the world. But I think leaders need to do the best they can for now and be very clear that nothing is set in stone. Like, I think that's the biggest lesson about hybrid is it is a moving, evolving, growing thing that has no end point. And getting really comfortable with that uncertainty for leaders as well as employees is going to be incredibly important for it to succeed, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Bev, the question I ask everyone who comes on the podcast, what makes you happier at work?
I think having autonomy and freedom to explore and be curious and to do new things within my role and to really stretch myself is probably the selfish answer. I think the broader answer is when I'm around people who inspire me, people who I can help grow or succeed in some shape or form, either through coaching or mentoring or just working together on someone, and together we achieve something that neither of us or any of us thought was possible, or being delighted by an outcome that we weren't expecting. So, I think those are two things. I like having a laugh with people. I like feeling joyful at work. And I love having the time and space to have greater life integration because of what's changed for us at work. So I think my happiness has gone up on some measures over the last 18 to 20 months.
Brilliant.
Admittedly, I feel like I've had probably some moments of burnout and blurring and unhappiness and dissatisfaction with just the state of the world. But I think mostly I find my joy in the flexibility that I have and the respect that I feel from others around me.
Brilliant. Love that. And what's the best way that people can connect with you? So feel free to share details about the podcast. I know you have conversations going on as well, your website, and if people want to connect with you on LinkedIn as well.
Yeah, sure. So you can find me via email at bev@jostle.me. And I am very active on LinkedIn. So I'm very easy to find there. You can either search for me on LinkedIn or it's linkedin.com/Bev Attfield, I think. If that doesn't work, just search Bev Attfield. Very active on Jostle's blog. I'm a contributor there very frequently, so you can go check out our blog, which is blog.jostle.me. And the People at Work podcast is where I have conversations similar to this one today. You can find us anywhere on the major players or anywhere that you generally get your podcasts. Just search People at Work and you'll find us there. And other than that, we do have some events happening. They're on a bit of a hiatus at the moment, but we do have something called Conversations at Work, which are more intimate conversations that are, kind of like a fireside chat with a group of friends who are interested in a specific topic around some sort of workplace matter. So you can check us out there. Again, just Google Conversations at Work and you'll find us. So I'm pretty easy to find. I'm very open to conversations. I love talking about this kind of thing. So please, if there's anything that I can help anyone with that's listening, or if anyone has an idea for a podcast topic or something they'd like me to research, also love to hear about that. So please reach out.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for your time today, Bev. I absolutely thoroughly enjoyed our chat. There's probably so much more we could dive into today.
There is.
In the matter of keeping things to a strict time. It's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you today. So thank you so much.
Wonderful. Same here. And I just love engaging with you and the conversations we have. So thanks for this opportunity, and let's keep connected.
Definitely.